Hello everybody, welcome to the MudRoom, our weekly free Uncommon Sense parenting class. How is everyone today? As you watch this, I am currently in Florida with my entire extended family. My mom, my dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, their son, my husband, and our two sons. We're taking the big kids to Disney and Legoland and Universal, and my mom and my sister-in-law and I are going to do some shopping, maybe get a little jump start on the holidays, because even with the conversion rate, y'all have no idea how cheap stuff is in the States. Like, it blows my mind. So fingers crossed, we're all having a good time. Family holidays are awesome memory-making opportunities, but I think we all know that as parents, they aren't really vacations and they're a lot of work, especially when you have a 9-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 1-year-old in the mix. So fingers crossed. All right, today we're talking to our kids about neurodiversity. This has come up a lot in parentability quite a bit recently. We've had a lot of kids who have received diagnoses in the last few months, mainly because the waitlists for an evaluation absolutely ballooned everywhere during the pandemic. And none of these were really surprises, either because the parents and I had observed really strong indicators and we were really just looking for a confirmation, or because the family came in suspecting the diagnosis already, but they weren't actually able to access any resources because of the pandemic. But this glut of diagnoses came with the problem of, how do I tell my child they're autistic? How do I tell my child that they have ADHD? How do I talk to my neurotypical kids about their brother, sister, friend who has recently received a diagnosis? So today I wanted to share with you how I've done it successfully in the past, how I've been suggesting my clients do it now, and how we follow this up going forward. Before we get into it, however, allow me to introduce myself for anyone who is new around here. My name's Alana Robinson, and I'm a parenting coach for parents of toddlers, preschoolers, and kindergartners. I help you understand why your kids are misbehaving and how to fix it without stickers, counting to 3, or losing your shit. I am your host here on the MudRoom. I'm also the host of the Parenting Posse Facebook group, and I'm the creator of the Parentability program, where I help you raise well-behaved kids who listen. While you're here, it would be a huge favor if you'd like and subscribe so that you never miss another class. And since this is the third last episode of 2022, you want to make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss when we come back in 2023 after our break. Okay, so you've got a diagnosis. Generally, that means that your child had to attend a rather involved evaluation. So they already know that you're checking something out. For many of our parentability kids, we've also introduced the concept of their brain states, of being in blue, red, or gray brain, and what that feels like. So talking about their brain and how it works isn't new. And if you aren't in parentability and you haven't already explained how brains work to your kids, I strongly encourage you to. Giving our kids information about how their brain works and how they can actively influence it, how they can use it more effectively, is really empowering for kids. It's a tool they can leverage. For most kids, they're getting these diagnoses between age 4 and 6. There are some kids who get a really early autism diagnosis around age 2, but it's rare, and it's generally because that child already has a sibling or a relative with the diagnosis and the parents notice the signs much earlier than most do. 2 and 3-year-olds also really can't have a conversation or metacognate yet. They can't really think about thinking or think about themselves. So if you happen to have a child who has been diagnosed early, I still encourage you to have this conversation. But this format is likely not going to be achievable until around age 4 or 5. That doesn't mean that you should keep it a secret till then. Autistic isn't a bad word, no diagnosis is. But they probably won't know or care what it means until they're in that 4 to 5-year-old range. As you've probably heard me say before in different contexts, I like to start conversations with kids with questions. So how I've always started this conversation is by asking them if they've heard of their diagnosis before. Do you know what autistic means? Have you ever heard of ADHD? Have you heard of apraxia before? If that is their diagnosis and it's not new, they probably already know quite a bit from hearing adults talk about it. Some of it may be accurate, some of it not so much. So this gives you an opportunity to listen to what they already know or think that they know. Then I generally move on to an established fact. We all have a brain. It's not air up there. And brains look pretty much the same on the outside. They're all pink and squishy looking. If I have a book that shows a brain, I'll usually bring it with me so that I have a visual. I really like the DK books in general. and then ask if they know what's inside a brain. Inside a brain are something called neurons. Do you know what neurons are? Again, anytime I introduce new information or new vocabulary, I default to asking what they already know. It has blown me away in the past how much some kids already have absorbed, either because they've heard adults, they've watched some educational show about it, they've been to a museum, they read a book, whatever. So I try not to assume, because one, it breaks up the conversation so that it's not just a lecture, and two, it gives me an opportunity to correct any misinformation they may have pieced together. And kids do that all the time. When I was a child, my dad quit the job that he'd had my whole life and he took a new one at a different company. And around the same time, the church that we attended requested that parents not allow children to stand on the upholstered benches with their shoes on. And somehow, in my little brain, I connected those two pieces of information and thought for an embarrassingly long time that we couldn't stand on the pews anymore because my dad had quit his job. I was in my teens when I finally realized these two things weren't connected at all. So we want to catch any of those logical fallacies before they hit the road, so to speak. So we have neurons. And neurons are like the wires in our brain that take information where it needs to go so that we can use it. They tell our heart to beat, our lungs to expand and contract. They carry what we like to eat, how we like to play, what feels good in our bodies, all the thoughts we have. But every brain is wired a little bit differently. No two are the same. Your brain is wired differently from mom or dad or sister or brother or grandma or your best friend, and that's okay. Different isn't bad, it's just different. Now this is important to highlight often. Different isn't bad, it's just different. By default, our brain wants everything to be the same. The status quo is safe, it's predictable, there's no room for surprises that might kill us. It's why kids all want to play with the same toy, wear the same clothes, have the same skin tone, have the same hairstyle, etc. Because they want to fit in. Fitting in, historically, is a safety mechanism. Standing out gets you hurt. So we want to highlight that different isn't bad or wrong, it's just different. And we're going to repeat that several times throughout this conversation. Now, even though everyone's brain is different, some brains are wired similarly. Do you know what it means to be similar? Almost the same, but not exactly the same. You have a lot in common. And we have names for these similarities. Allistic, autistic, ADHD are the three most common types of brain wiring. And if your child has a different diagnosis, throw that on the list too. There's also anxious, dyslexic, etc. Then we're drawing on that experience that they had. Do you remember how we went to that doctor and played those games? We did that so that we could figure out what kind of brain wiring you have. We did this so that mom and dad and your teachers can teach you in a way that makes sense to your brain and makes it easier for your brain to learn. And as it turns out, you have an autistic brain, or you have an ADHD brain, or you have an anxious brain. And I'm so glad that we know this now because I have an allistic brain or an ADHD brain or whatever your specific neurotype is, and that means that I've been teaching you some things in the wrong way. So now that I know, I can start teaching you in a way that makes more sense. Do you have any questions? We're going to stop there because you've already given them a lot of information. Most kids under age 6 can't sit and listen for more than 10 minutes at a time, and they need a chance to process. So 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be, do you have any questions? And they're going to be like, no, can I go play? That doesn't mean you did anything wrong, okay? What generally happens is after they've had a chance to process and think about it, and children do this much slower than adults or teens, they will come to you, usually at the most inconvenient time, and ask follow-up questions, at which point you can continue the conversation. Again, giving them small amounts of truthful information and leaving space for them to ask follow-up questions. And just so I'm clear, they're not doing it at the most inconvenient time because of their diagnosis, they're doing it because they're children. My son came to me after I'd explained to him about autism because my godchildren are autistic, and he came to me to ask questions about autism while I was on the toilet. He's completely neurotypical. That's just how kids are. The nice thing about this is that it now allows you to reference their neurotype when in a social setting or giving directions between siblings without any negative connotation. Why does my brother get to always go first during assemblies at school? Well, because he has an autistic brain and waiting through a loud assembly is really hard for him. So to make it easier for him to share his contribution, he gets to go first. That way, if it gets too loud or overwhelming for him, he can step out without missing his turn. You have an holistic brain that doesn't get as overwhelmed by sound, and while it's still not fun to wait your turn, you have the ability to. Are you finding it hard to wait? And then you can problem solve that. Or one of the kids that I worked with back when I did early intervention was very aware that her peers could all write their name, but she couldn't at age 6. She has Down syndrome, and her fine motor skills weren't quite there yet. And so we talked about how, yes, her autistic peers could write their name, so they do. Her Down syndrome brain had a harder time telling her muscles how to move to write. It wasn't a lack of understanding or knowledge, it wasn't a lack of effort on her part. So she could practice to help her brain learn the motor pattern, but sometimes practicing is very tiring. So if she was too tired to write her name, she could use her name stamp. And it made her feel better about it. I think until we had that conversation, she'd thought that she was stupid. And it helped her peers to understand why something that was so easy for them was so difficult for her. And in fact, some of them came up with really neat ways to help her practice because they saw how much she wanted to get better at it. That school used the program that's called Handwriting Without Tears, and one of the steps to that program is to have an adult write the letters on a chalkboard and the student erases it with a small wet sponge. It gives them something to trace. Her peers had done this. So outside, they asked if she wanted them to write her name in sidewalk chalk and she could go over it with a wet paintbrush. And they did her name and drawings inside of the blackboard. They were very supportive of her goal, and the whole class cheered her on when she was able to do it on her own. So I hope that gives you an idea of how to introduce this topic to your young kids in a supportive way and keep the conversation going. Like most big topics, we discuss this with kids not all at once. It's not a one and done situation. It's ongoing. And we like to keep conversations ongoing in the Parenting Posse too. So if you want to expand on this, please come and join us over there and we'd love to chat with you. The link is in the description. Have a fantastic day, everyone. I'll see you next week for another Uncommon Sense parenting class. Bye.